Well, it looks like it is right at 10:30, so we are going to get started. Thanks everybody for joining me this morning for our networking session on legal responsibilities and the internal responsibility system. So this is one of the safety connections that WSPS puts on frequently. Here to kind of chat and learn about all things legal and certainly how it focuses and relates to the IRS. So we do just have a couple of housekeeping style slides to go over first, and then we will get right into the content after that. Okay, so just going to quickly put up the slide here. I won't stay on it for too long. So it'll be in your chat box as well. But there is a short survey available for you guys to complete or fill out. It is from the MLI TSD or Ministry of Labor, Immigration Training and Skills Development. It's just a demographic survey. So they're just looking to try to get some data about who is joining as far as like what kind of industries, what kind of position titles, etc. It is completely anonymous. No personal information is collected. Very much optional to participate in. But if anybody does have interest in doing that survey for us, you'll just be asked for that function number, which is on the bottom there. And again, the link is in the chat. So at any time throughout the session or even after, you're welcome to participate in the survey. All right. As far as audio connections, etc., so computer audio is definitely recommended. You can call in via phone conference if you need it. Your microphones will be muted, your cameras will also remain off, but the chat box is going to be available throughout the session to answer some of the questions that are kind of going to come up through the presentation, as well as additional questions that you guys may have, any kind of feedback, etc., that you would like to give. So anytime again something is coming up, do feel free to use that chat box to give any kind of communication. Every once in a while, I may ask you to do some kind of reaction. So it sounds like a couple of you were able to figure that out already. So if you kind of go right up to the top there, there's raise and react. So raise hand is available as well as reactions are available too. We're going to skip over the poll session. We do not have poll questions within this session. We are going to go more to like a narrative style chat where I'll ask you guys some questions and have you guys give me the answers or some feedback again, just within our chat boxes there. So I think we've all found it. If you go to the top of your screen, you'll see a chat button. It should pop up on your side. And that's what we'll use for the communication in this session. I will do my best to continue to watch the chat as well. So if additional questions come up throughout the course or throughout the session, do feel free to put them in that chat box and we can pause and certainly answer and talk about any of those questions that you guys may have. Okay. All right, so you do have an ability to turn on live captions if you are interested. So if you go to the sort of three dots on the top of your screen, kind of where it says more, kind of maybe beside camera, depending on what you look like, you can pick the live captions, language and speech, and turn on live captions from there. You can also watch this presentation in full screen if you're interested. So if you go to view and select full screen, you can certainly do that. But just be aware that if you are in a full screen mode, the chat box becomes not something that you can see. So if you are interested in participating in the chat box, being able to put your questions, comments, etc. in, full screen may not be the most appropriate view, but just know that it is available. All right, so we do have some common goals when it comes to our safety connections. So this really is a forum where hopefully you learn a little bit from me, but you also learn quite a bit from each other as well. So we are here to learn, share, discover different values and ideas. We're trying to help everybody virtually connect with their peers, talk about some best practices. Certainly when we get into the due diligence section of this course, I'm very interested to hear about some of the best practices you guys are following. And then, of course, go through some, personal experiences, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so after all that kind of housekeeping stuff, we're going to get right into our presentation. So maybe just a tiny bit of an introduction around or about me. So my name is Kristen Honorado, and I am a specialized consultant here at WSPS, and my specialty is actually in occupational health and safety. So specialize in a lot of things legislative related, a lot of the legalities, the act regulations, and all, again, things sort of under that occupational legal realm. Been with WSPS for just under, 10 years now. But prior to WSPS, all of my safety experience is in manufacturing style industry. So I did see some of you guys said where you were from. It looks like we're all kind of in that southern Ontario area. A couple of people looked like they were quite close to me. I am actually in the Cambridge area, so those of you that were from that Kitchener, Cambridge, Guelph area, definitely close in neighbors. So I'm going to invite you guys to take this time to put in the chat box maybe some of the other industries that you guys are representing, just to get a good feel of the kinds of industries that are joining us today in this presentation. A little quick pause to read. It's manufacturing, agriculture, Wonderford, drainage, okay. Retail, manufacturing, chemicals. Okay, so you've got a wide range of different industries that are being represented here, which is great. Information that we're going to talk about today is relevant to all industry because we are again focusing on the Act and regulations. So going to be lots of great information, I hope, for every industry that's joining us today. Mining, that's really interesting, Dan. You don't see a lot of mining industry with it, so that's really great. I'm excited to see or hear some of your stories. Mining again, wonderful. Okay, so I did notice that this is not filled in. I'm not sure, that's my fault. I definitely uploaded just this wrong presentation from here. So I'll fill in the blanks for us and we'll fix that later. But basically what we're going to talk about today is we're really going to kind of go through this in a couple of different ways. So first we are going to focus on legislation in general. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Act, kind of the parts of the Act, different regulations that apply to the Act, different regulations that are important to us, and as well as some of the other components that kind of make up legislation here in Ontario. We're then going to kind of move into the IRS and really focus on some specific responsibilities. We will focus on what we call our three kind of primary work groups, which is the employer, the supervisor, and the worker. And then we'll shift into sort of that act and thought of due diligence. What does due diligence mean? How do we show due diligence? How do we prove that we're doing everything reasonable in the circumstance? During that due diligence portion really will be where I'm looking for you guys to share some stories and some best practices so we can learn from each other about how to best show this factor and how to best ensure that we're protecting our workers. All right, so just a little bit of a kind of a primer question / statement for you guys. So this is a quote from a gentleman named Mike Shavers. So no job is so important that we can't take the time to perform it safely. So I guess kind of first part about this is who agrees with this statement? Who agrees that no job is so important that we can't take the time to do it safely? Maybe we'll use this one as a hands up kind of scenario. Thumbs up, hands up. Yeah, hopefully we all really have this as a feel, right? We all have this feel that no job is so important that we shouldn't be doing it safely. No job is worth us not going home at the end of the day. No job is worth us not spending time with our friends, family, pets, whoever is there that cares about us and that we care about as well. So then why do we think incidents still happen at the workplace? If we all hopefully have this general belief that no job is so important that we can't do it safely, why are incidents still happening? What do you think some of our primary causes are? So I see Rosa saying haste makes waste. Yeah, fair enough, right? Lots of times it can be rushing for sure. But what are some of those other reasons why we continue to see incidents happen at the workplace? Just kind of looking at the chat as we go. So rushing is coming up a lot, not taking enough time, not getting it, trying to get it done too quickly, complacency. Yeah, maybe a little bit of that feel of like it hasn't happened to me before, it's not going to happen to me now, right? Lack of training, pressure, yeah, that kind of does lead into some concerns, right? New hires, improper training, rushing. Yeah, we definitely have some themes there, right? When we think about, we've all got that desire and that hope that we go home safely at the end of the day. But things happen, right? There are pressures that happen. We're maybe not trained as properly as we would be. We've got to get the job done. We're rushing. All of those things can certainly play a factor in potentially having incidents happen at our workplace. Yeah, I like that, right? It's the way we've always done it. Why would we change now? So legislation is obviously designed to help us put in corrections, help us put in mitigators, help us put in things to ideally prevent injuries from happening, ideally make sure that our workers go home safely at the end of the day. But it's not everything, right? When we think about legislation, it's not covering all expectations. It's not covering everything we need to do to protect our workers, which is why legislation also has that clause in there that says that the employers and the supervisors need to do everything reasonable in the circumstance to protect the worker. It really is when we get focused on that due diligence expectation, which we are again going to talk about sort of at the back end of the presentation. Okay, so a little bit about legislation. We're going to kind of go right to the beginning and try to make sure that we're all understanding the different pieces of legislation, the different kinds of legislation that help govern what we need to do to help protect our workers from a health and safety standpoint. So all of us pretty aware, hopefully, that you are required to follow the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So the base or easy way to say this is if you are in Ontario or a provincially regulated workplace, you are going to be required to follow the Occupational Health and Safety Act. There are some people, some companies that do follow a different piece of legislation. Anybody have any guesses or examples of who may not be required to follow the Occupational Health and Safety Act? Sort of one kind of key group of people that doesn't necessarily follow this legislation? Federal. Yeah, absolutely. So really important to kind of focus on that provincially regulated, right? Provincially regulated companies or facilities will follow the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Bella and Vanessa, I'm seeing you say police emergency services. They actually do follow the act. So if you're a paramedic or work for fire or ambulance, the act is absolutely what you follow. Provincial police follow the act. If you were an OPP or somebody that was again on the federal side, you wouldn't necessarily follow the act. But yeah, if you're provincially regulated, this is the governing body for you. They do have exceptions under the regulations, absolutely, Kim, kind of seeing that. But this is still their governing body when it comes to safety expectations. So we think about the act. The act is like our general basic principles. So act sets out general principles, general guidelines, general rules and responsibilities. Again, really that piece of legislation that applies and governs what all of us are doing here in the province of Ontario. So you're not actually finding a lot of detail in the act. It really is, again, when we're learning about those like general health and safety expectations, roles, responsibilities, etc. So let me kind of move up the ladder when it comes to legislation. And the next piece of legislation that is important to us is actually the regulations. So regulations are the piece that support the act. So they give more detail about how we apply the act. They give more sector-specific information. They give more hazard-specific information. Again, really the piece of legislation that tries to support what we need to do to comply with the act. Sorry, guys, I'm going to tickle my throat there. So when we think about the act will often use words like as prescribed. So wear PPE as prescribed. Not hire people that are not of age to work as prescribed. Often when we say that word prescribed, it means that we are going to find out what to do or how to do the expectation that the Act is giving us in places like the regulation. So PPE as prescribed, the regulation is going to tell us what kind of PPE to wear. Age of work as prescribed, the regulation will tell us what the age of work is. So we think about the Act again as that general expectation, general details around what we need to do, and the regulations telling us the details around how to do it. There are lots and lots of different regulations. We're going to go through those in a little bit. Some of them can be sector specific. So based on the sector of work you're doing, so manufacturing, mining, construction, education, etc. And some of those are hazard specific. So hazards broken down into safety hazards, health hazards, etc. But there are lots of different regulations that could certainly apply to the workplace. So more to come on that. So the next kind of piece of the regulatory puzzle is our codes. So we are, of course, required to follow different kinds of codes, very much on the side of protecting our safety. Some examples that are kind of listed up there, sort of what we call the big three when it comes to codes. We are required to follow the building code. We're required to follow the fire code. We're required to follow the electrical code. Again, very much a legislative requirement for us. There are many times when the Act actually references the code, making sure that, our buildings meet building code, making sure fire extinguishers are, inspected via the fire code and things like that. These are another example or another piece, that is considered a legislative requirement for us. Any other examples of other codes that could be out there, sort of outside of those three that I've got listed? Does anybody follow a different code maybe at their workplace? Not seeing anything else. An elevator code, it might have been an example if somebody had an elevator at their facility. Again, there are other ones out there, but the three that are listed are kind of the primary ones that we focus on. So the next piece of the puzzle when it comes to legislation is what we call standards. So standards are out there. They are typically guidance on a very specific topic or technical matter. So like a standard on a specific piece of equipment or a standard on a specific piece of personal protective equipment. Standards on, again, a very kind of specific topic, giving us a lot more detail around what's expected. So we've got some examples there. CSA, ANSI, NFPA are the ones that we've got kind of as an example there. Who can remind me what CSA stands for in the chat? People a chance to. Yeah, perfect, right? So CSA, Canadian Standards Association, ANSI is the American National Standards Institute. So again, technical guidelines, right? Technical guidelines about, again, specific pieces of equipment or information or requirements, giving us a little bit more detail to make sure that we're following. Are standards legally required to be followed? What do we think? Standards are a legal requirement? Are you legally required to follow a CSA standard? So Katie's saying no, just the Act. Micah's saying no. Lauren's saying if they're written into legislation. Yeah, absolutely. So it is kind of that last one there. So in general, standards are not legally required to be followed. In general, we are not going to be held accountable or written in order against a standard. They are often considered best practice. They're often considered everything reasonable in the circumstance. But really, most of the time, a standard is, again, not something that we can be legally held accountable to unless our standard is referenced within the Act. So there are times where a standard is kind of referenced or called it within legislation. In those cases, those standards would become the law because legislation is basically making them the law. PP is a great example, right? So often you'll see within legislation, like you must wear CSA approved safety shoes or CSA approved safety classes. That's an example where legislation is saying you have to follow a standard. That CSA for safety shoes is an example. that would be the time in which, again, legislation could turn or make a standard actual law or a legislative requirement. So most of the time, the standard, again, is considered that good industry practice, best practice, certainly that due diligence of everything reasonable. But again, not most of the time something that we can be held legislatively accountable to. Does that make sense to everybody? Kind of where standards land? Okay. So the next piece to the puzzle, as we kind of finish the ladder or move up the ladder, is what we call guidelines. So guidelines are detailed government rules, policies, etc., written by typically a government agency that are, again, giving more information about, again, like another classic or sort of, standard policy program procedure. Again, guidelines often giving even more detail around expectations, more sort of guidance around how to actually implement a program based on a specific topic, hazard, or whatnot. So there are some examples there. There's a guideline on PSRs written by the ministry. We've got a supervisor guideline. Any other examples of guidelines that you guys can think about that you may reference in your sort of everyday life? Another big example that I often think about would be like the heat stress guideline, right, written by the ministry as well. We know that there's no true legislation around heat stress, but we do have a guideline out there for heat stress, helping us understand how to put in a good heat stress policy program, etc. Guidelines on ergonomics, another great example of when you might see a guideline at the workplace. So what do we think about guidelines? Are they legally required to be followed? Do we legally have to follow a guideline? We'll wait for some maybe answers in the chat. So Vanessa says nope. Nope. Okay. All right. So some pretty consistent no's. Absolutely, right? We are not legally required to follow a guideline. There is no legal expectation for us to follow those guidelines. They are just, again, considered best practice, good industry standard, something that we're going to put into play to help us support implementation of policies, programs, etc. So kind of we'll go back to the beginning. So the act, absolutely, right? Legal requirement for us all to follow. That's an always yes for us. We've got regulations, also a legal requirement for all of us to follow. We then have our codes, legal requirements, not sort of directly related to the act and regulations as far as being completely connected, but legally required for us to follow. We have our standards, most of the time not a legal requirement, sometimes yes, right? Sometimes if our legislation actually references them. And then we've got our guidelines not being a legal requirement, but something that we definitely would consider and use as a best practice. Kind of makes sense to everybody how that works and how our legislation fits kind of together? Okay. So what we're going to focus on next is the actual act itself. So the Occupational Health and Safety Act is the governing body, again, for all workplaces here in Ontario. It is broken down into what we would call parts. So parts are kind of like chapters of a book, all focusing on a different aspect or piece of requirement that the act is kind of outlining. So part one of the Occupational Health and Safety Act is what we call application. So who does this book apply to, right? What are the industries, companies, et cetera, that this book is actually applying to, that it actually has some jurisdiction over. Part two, we consider administration. So who helps to administer the act and regulations. You'll see some information about, the Ministry of Labor or the MLI, TSD in here. Some things about the director. It's also another really important group that kind of falls under the part two of administration. Anybody know what group I might be referring to that has some expectations under this administration part? You probably have one at your workplace. That's a fairly important piece of your safety program. Joint Health and Safety Committee. Amazing. Yeah. So the Joint Health and Safety Committee is actually part of this section, or this part of the Act. So when we think about the Joint Health and Safety Committee, the Joint Health and Safety Committee does have some expectation to help us administer the Act. Make sure that companies are following expectations, recognize hazards, provide recommendations for hazards that are noticed. So we think about the Health and Safety Committee. If you ever have interest in learning about all of their different functions or all of their different duties, you are going to go into the Occupational Health and Safety Act. You are going to go into Part 2 for administration, and then specifically Section 8 if you had a health and safety rep, and Section 9 if you had a Joint Health and Safety Committee. So again, a really important piece, really significant functions when it comes to helping support our health and safety programs. So the next part in the Act is Part 3, which is duties of employers and other persons. We're going to focus quite a bit on this part here. This is where we find all of our duties and responsibilities for the employer, the supervisor, the worker. We would also find responsibilities for directors. We would find responsibilities for constructors, owners, suppliers. Again, we're going to focus on sort of those big three, which is our employer, supervisor, and our worker. So Part 4 of the Act is actually about toxic substances. So this is where we're getting a little bit of information about how to protect our workers from chemicals and toxic substances that are at the workplace. More detail is within the regulations. So like WHMIS regulation, Regulation 833, but this is providing some toxic substance detail. The next one we have as one of our parts is the right to refuse work and the right to stop work. So as we all know, we all have the right to refuse unsafe work. This is the part that truly outlines expectations and sort of the steps we would take if we were to have a work refusal at our facility. Hopefully most of us know that the Joint Health and Safety Committee also gets another right, sort of the fourth basic health and safety right, and that right is around the right to stop work. So again, if you have a health and safety committee at your facility, you hopefully have a certified worker member and a certified management member. Those certified members of your committee have what we call the right to stop work. So under this part here, Part 5 is where we're at now. You're going to see some expectations or the outline of what those rights look like. We have Part 6. So Part 6 is reprisals from the employer or basically by the employer, really outlining that employers and companies are not allowed to reprise against their workers for following the Act or regulations. Does anybody want to do the Coles Note definition for reprisal? What does reprisal actually mean? Let's pause and see if someone put something in the chat here. Maybe not totally sure. So reprisal, really fancy word that just kind of means like getting in trouble, right? So we can't get in trouble for following the Act, for invoking our rights, following the expectations of legislation. So that could be being fired, it could be being demoted, it could be being threatened to be fired. Again, whatever we kind of consider trouble would be what that reprisal means. All right, the next part that the Act is broken down to is what we call notices. So notices being truly that, right? When do we have to give notice to the ministry? If we've had an incident, if we've had an accident, if we've had some kind of event, there's some outline there around the kinds of notices that are required to be given. Our next parts, I think we're at, can't remember, 7, I guess, is enforcement. So enforcement being what can the ministry do, right? If the ministry shows up at our door, what are they allowed to do when they get there? So how are they allowed to enforce the Act? How are they allowed to enforce the regulations? What could be some of the expectations that they're asking us to follow? And then really, how are they able to perform their job? Part 9, I think, is where I'm at now, is penalties and other offenses. So penalties and other offenses, or sorry, and other, like other consequence. how bad could it be? So if something was found by the ministry, what are sort of those maximum fines, maximum penalties that a company could receive? So sometimes they're in the way of order, right? Sometimes they can be monetary. Really, again, the outline of what the consequence is if the ministry finds that a company is infracting or not following legislation, maybe has caused an incident, injury, etc. And then the last one is what we call regulations. So this part of the act is truly just outlining what regulations fall under the act, what regulations sort of are working in tandem with the act, what regulations kind of belong to this piece of legislation. Okay. Any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns about any of that? Before I kind of move on. I do see Linda's just kind of put something in there. Yes, Linda, I do believe that there will be at least a recording of this presentation available. Maybe I'll let our moderator confirm if copies of the presentation are sent out. I'm not totally sure, but I will say that it is being recorded and that will certainly be available moving forward. Okay, so moving on, regulations. So as mentioned, regulations are sort of where we get all of the detail, right? The detail about how we follow the act or how we follow the expectations set out in the act. So there are lots and lots of regulations out there governing the way in which we do our work. So maybe again, I'll ask you guys to put in the chat box. What are some other regulations that you know you're following at the workplace? So let's see if we can get a little bit of a tally of some regulations before I show you all the different regulations that fall under the Act. Okay, Reg 851, that's a pretty big one probably for most of us. So industrial regulations, if we're not as familiar with the numbers associated, so that's a great one. So we've got the industrial establishments, Reg 851. So that's one of many. What would be some other examples of regulations maybe you follow? Okay, so Jenny's saying construction regulations. Absolutely. It's going quick now. So both construction and industrial, depending on activity, totally, right? And we're going to talk about the fact that often regulations are working together, right? We're not typically working on just one regulation. 11.1, that's a really interesting, Jonas. I appreciate that you put that in. That is a regulation. It's the first aid regulation. Actually doesn't belong to the Act. So the 11.1 is not a regulation that is associated with the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It is absolutely still a regulation that applies to health and safety, but it applies to a different piece of legislation when it comes to health and safety. So 11.01 actually belongs to the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. We give it to you in the Green Book, or you'll notice that 11.01 is often in the Green Book because it's used so often, right? But it actually belongs to the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. Okay, I've got some other numbers up here. 414, perfect. Designated substances, absolutely. So 490. No, not at all, Jonah. It's a great point, and it comes up often. So I'm really glad that you brought up 11.01. Very much a regulation that we need to know about, but again, it's just belongs to a different piece of legislation. So really, thank you for bringing that up because it shows how many pieces of safety legislation are actually out there for us to focus on. All right, so we've got some great ones. So we'll kind of start first. So as I mentioned before, regulations are broken down into sometimes sector specific broken down into sector specific, which is kind of like industry related, as well as like hazard specific, whether it's safety hazards, health hazards, or otherwise. And then we've got some other regulations too. So first is the sector specific. So you may follow over this like a regulation here purely based on the kind of work you do. So we've got the industrial establishments. That one came up a lot. We've got the construction projects. So if you're doing construction work, that would be a sector specific one. Mines and mining. Somebody already put in the chat that they were in the mining sector. So you would follow the mining regulation. Residential facilities, farming operations, healthcare, all considered sector specific based again on the type of sector you are actually doing work in. So very likely you follow a sector-specific regulation. There are some companies that do not follow a sector-specific regulation, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to follow some of the other regulations that are out there. So the next kind is regulations based on hazards. So we've got diving operations, right? If you dive into water, that's hazardous. We've got a regulation to sort of govern how that work is done. Window cleaning, again, if you wash windows, that's a hazard. So we've got some regulation to govern that. Offshore oil, gas production, confined space, very much again on the hazard part of the work. You might still be an industrial facility that goes into confined space. So you're following the industrial establishment as your sector-specific regulation, but also following the confined space regulation when you enter a confined space, because that's helping to govern the hazard. So not separate, right? Could all be working at the same time. We've also got some health regulations, so also very specific to hazard expectation, but very much focused on, again, like the hazard expectation, or sorry, the health expectation. So somebody wrote down designated substances, definitely, right? If you have a designated substance, maybe a silica, an isocyanate, maybe you've got asbestos, etc., you're going to follow the regulation associated with the designated substance that you use. We've got control of biological and chemicals, right? Control of exposure too. So if you're using chemicals at the workplace, that regulation is going to talk about like limit values, how much you can be exposed to, when air sampling needs to be done, things like that. X-ray safety. If you have an X-ray, we have to follow the X-ray regulation. Noise, right? We all know that noise is a big concern. If we've got noise levels that are of concern at the workplace, we follow the noise regulation. Does anybody want to remind me what the magic number is in Ontario for when the noise regulation comes into play? $85. Yeah, perfect. Great answer. So you know here, 85 is kind of the magic number for noise. If we've got noise levels that are going above or at 85 decibels, we've got to start following the noise regulation and expectations. WHMIS, a regulation that helps support chemical management, right? I did see somebody, I can't see now who it came from, but diving could also fall under Ministry of Transportation. Absolutely true. Another example of where legislation can start to flow, right? We think about, WHMIS as an example. WHMIS is certainly regulation under the Act. It also has pieces of transportation of dangerous goods and definitely has pieces of transportation as well. Lots of times where, again, you'll see legislation kind of flowing to other pieces of regulation as well. Okay. So then we've got a whole list of other regulations also. So these other regulations don't necessarily, again, direct exactly to a certain sector, and they're not necessarily around a certain hazard, but they are all important as well. So we've got a fairly new regulation to us, Regulation 420, which is the incident and illness reporting. So if you need to, again, report to the Ministry of Labor or the MLI TSC, this new Reg 420 tells you exactly when to report, what you have to say, what do your, report records need to look like, and things like that. We've got our training regulation. So training regulation around occupational health and safety. That's where you find the details about our health and safety in 4 steps, our health and safety in 5 steps. Working for heights if you're in construction, joint health and safety committee training. So there's a regulation for training. We've got a regulation for the Office of the Worker and the Employer Advisor, universities, teachers, rollover, protective structures, firefighters, right? So there's lots and lots of these other regulations that also could become important based on what's happening or based on the kind of work that you're doing. You'll see on the bottom there, there's a regulation listed, washroom facilities and cleaning. This is probably the newest of our regulations, not even coming into force yet, but new to January 2026. We will have to follow the regulation for cleaning our washroom facilities, right? So again, all kinds of other regulations that are also important for us to be aware of. So as mentioned earlier, regulations are not like individual, right? You don't follow one regulation at a time. it is very possible that your workplace is following multiple regulations at the same time. So kind of went through that example. I could be an industrial facility that follows the industrial regulations, that has a construction project at my facility, so it's also following the construction regulations, that also has a designated substance, so follows the designated substance regulation, that also is going into a confined space, that also has levels of noise, right? So kind of easy example, that's one company that might be following 5 or 6 regulations at the exact same time, because some of it's sector specific, some of it's hazard specific, some of it kind of falls into that other category. A lot of words. Does that make sense to everybody? Kind of what the regulations are and sort of how they fit into the puzzle? Any questions about that before I move on? Okay, I think I saw a thumbs up, so hopefully a couple of thumbs up there. So hopefully we're starting to feel a little bit better about how regulations kind of fit in sort of where they belong. Again, regulations are where we're going to get that extra information or more detailed information about what the Act is expecting us to do. Okay. All right. So let's now get a little bit deeper into the responsibilities. So as mentioned, the Occupational Health and Safety Act does outline specific responsibilities for workplace parties. We're going to focus on 3. So we're going to focus on the employer, we're going to focus on the supervisor, and we're going to focus on the worker. There are other people in that's part of the act, like again, constructors, owners, suppliers, but we're going to focus kind of on the big 3. So the first group that we're going to focus on is the employer, but let's go through some definitions to make sure we all understand what these different workplace parties are. So definition of an employer: person who employs one or more workers or contracts for the service of one or more workers, and includes a constructor or subcontractor, contractor or subcontractor who performs work or supplies services, and a contractor or subcontractor who undertakes with an owner, constructor, contractor, or subcontractor to perform work or supply services. Again, pretty wordy, kind of breaking that down into simple terms. Employer, really anybody that hires or employs people to do work, whether that's a direct employer worker, whether that's a contracted employee, whether that's hiring somebody to do contract or construction work. Employer providing monetary compensation to a person to provide work. Okay. All right, supervisor, much shorter definition. Also the one that probably gets the most confusing when we think about is somebody a supervisor or not. So supervisor, simply defined as a person who has charge over a workplace or authority over a worker. So this comes up a lot in conversations. Again, there's lots of discussions often around this magic word of supervisor. But when it comes to legislation, that's simply what we're comparing against. Do you have charge over a workplace or authority over a worker? If the answer is yes, you are under legislation considered a supervisor. Then we've got a definition of a worker. Worker, simply defined as a person who performs work or supplies services for monetary compensation. The workplace or workers definition does continue on to give a little bit of extra detail. So it does include secondary students perform work or supply services for no monetary compensation under a work experience program. Basically, we think we're kind of paying them in knowledge, right? So any of those like interns, co-ops, etc. It also talks about colleges and universities in that same way. So supply services for no monetary compensation under a program approved by a college or university in a post-secondary institute. So again, thinking about kind of those co-op terms, etc. What's not included there, more just fun fact than anything, it also excludes anybody that's working at a prison or a penitentiary. I'm sorry, I don't say that word well. That is being paid compensation also would actually be considered not a worker, even though there is monetary value being given. I see a hand up there, Sean. I don't know if you want to put a question in the chat box or send me a message directly. or if there's a concern, but feel free to write that question in the chat box there for sure. Okay. So let's break down supervisor just a tiny bit more. So definition of supervisor: person who has charge of a workplace or authority over a worker. So what, maybe we'll use this as a good opportunity to chat as well. What would be some other maybe titles or job positions that could be considered supervisors, even if their official title isn't considered a supervisor? Okay, Elizabeth, lead hands. That one comes up a lot. Yep. Manager for sure. Yep. Line lead, I think is what Elizabeth's written here. Yeah, absolutely. Coordinator, possibly. Yeah. Anyone that directs work, great. Great answer there, Rosie. Yeah. So the title supervisor is not what makes you a supervisor. The title supervisor is minor, right? What makes you a supervisor is if do you follow this definition. So do you have charge over a workplace or authority over a worker? So this little table is right from the ministry's website. There is actually a guidance document, so a guideline like we talked about before, that kind of outlines very specifically what is a supervisor, what is not a supervisor. Jessica, who's my moderator in the background, hi Jess, if you want to make me a little reminder when we send out resources, I will certainly send you guys the link to this guideline. Very, very interesting to learn what the ministry kind of considers sort of acts that the supervisor could do to make them fall under the definition. So this is just a little snippet of that. We've got charge over workplace. So what could that mean? Somebody that determines the tasks to be done and by whom. That would make you a supervisor if you do that. Directing and monitoring how work is performed. That could make you a supervisor. Directing staff and other resources to address health and safety concerns. That could make you a supervisor. Authority over a worker. What are some ministry examples here? Of course, hire, fire, discipline, or recommend discipline could put you into that bucket of supervisor. Enforcing procedures, managing resources, right? Again, this is just a little bit of a snippet around that. There is a great guideline around what kind of makes you a supervisor, but just remember it is broader than that simple, like, is that your title, right? It's not the title that matters, it's what you actually do. Okay. All right, so before we get into the actual specifics of responsibilities that are outlined, let's take a moment to kind of think about how these responsibilities actually fall under the IRS. So IRS in the world of safety, we've all heard this 100 times, stands for the Internal Responsibility System. So internal responsibility system, really kind of layman's terms around that is every person in every position has a responsibility when it comes to safety. It is all of us working together all of the time that make the IRS as effective as possible. So the IRS is a bit of a tiered system in the sense that the employer does have the most responsibility when it comes to safety. Our supervisors kind of have a mid-level responsibility of safety, and then our workers have the least amount of responsibility when it comes to safety. So I like to break it down, kind of thinking about the employer as sort of like the creators, right? They're the establishers. They're the ones that determine what hazards we have. They're the ones that determine what programs we need. They're the ones that determine what training is required, what policies do we have to have. They're really the ones that determine, establish the safety program that a company needs to implement. Supervisors are like our enforcers, monitors. They're the ones that make sure that our workers are following the established program that the employer has set out for us. So they monitor work, they communicate, they provide training, they make sure that workers understand expectations, they enforce expectations, right? They're really, again, the ones that are ensuring that our workers are following correctly the programs that the employer has established. Workers are kind of like the doers. We just simply have to follow the instructions. We have to follow the rules. We have to follow our training. We have to do what's expected of us. So kind of, again, that top level is a bit of that establishment, middle level supervisor is enforcement, and then the worker is simply like the do or like the completion of, right? Again, they do all have to work together. They do all have to kind of be synchronized for this to be effective, but we all have to of course, follow our expectations. Let's think about a supervisor and an employer. Are employers also supervisors? What do we think? Is an employer considered a supervisor? Hopefully you're all nodding yes, where I can't see you, but yeah, our employers are absolutely supervisors, right? They absolutely direct work and sort of how work goes. Are supervisors also workers? If you're a supervisor on this chat, do you get a paycheck every day or every week or every couple of weeks? Yeah, definitely, right? So supervisors are workers. Are employers workers? Do you think our employers bring home paychecks? Hopefully, again, we're all nodding yes. Yeah, so when we think about responsibilities, they also kind of go down the line. So the employer has employer responsibility. They also have to follow supervisor responsibilities and worker responsibilities. Supervisors, again, also workers, they have to follow those worker responsibilities as well. So that tiered system when it comes to expectation and requirement, again, all sort of working in conjunction with each other to make the program as effective as possible. We've got a group on the outside. So this group is really important to us, right? Kind of talked about them before. They are absolutely part of the Occupational Health and Safety Act under that Section 9 or 8 if you have a health and safety rep. This group is on the outside of the IRS, and their primary job is to monitor. So their expectation is to monitor our IRS. They're there to watch and sort of make recommendations on the health of the internal responsibility system. So they look for hazards, they do inspections, they make recommendations to the employer about where they're finding or noticing faults in the IRS. So you think about a committee. Committee does an inspection on a monthly basis. A committee finds hazards while they're doing those inspections. Every hazard a committee finds is telling us that we have a hole in the IRS. If a committee finds 5 broken ladders at your facility, yeah, the broken ladder itself is a hazard, but those ladders are telling us that something in the IRS isn't working. So I found 5 broken ladders on my committee inspection. Does that mean I don't have a good ladder safety program? So is the employer not doing their part? Does that mean that my supervisors aren't enforcing my ladder safety program? As in, are we not communicating, training, ensuring, enforcing that it's being followed? Or are workers simply not following it? And then we maybe have some corrective counseling or other concerns on the bottom. So kind of maybe something to move forward with. When you think about the committee, they're not looking for hazards, specifically are, but the bigger picture is they are looking for holes in the IRS. So the ladder, the broken ladder, yes, we have to fix the ladder, but we also have to fix why the ladder is there, right? Why is the broken ladder available to our worker? So they're monitoring how the IRS is functioning. They're looking for what part of this isn't working as expected. One other thing I will just mention about, because I hear it a lot in my travels, and I just want to clear it up here if I can for those of us that are on this call. Joint Health and Safety Committee members do not have any responsibilities. We'll say that again. Joint Health and Safety Committee members do not have any responsibilities. You will not find the committee under section or part 3, responsibilities of. Committee members have functions. Committee members have duties. Committee members have expectations, but they do not have responsibility. So if a ministry inspector was to come into your workplace and they were to look at your committee and say, you only did 6 inspections this year and you're supposed to do 12, right? You know, legally we've got to do 12 and you only did 6. Who are they going to talk about? Who are they going to maybe give the order to or maybe have the concern with? Who's going to be responsible for ensuring that our committee did 6 inspections or 12 inspections? I apologize. The employer, right? So do you see, hopefully, how that makes sense, right? The committee is a function of doing inspections. The employer is responsible for ensuring they're done. So if you've ever had someone say to you, it's the committee's responsibility, you can now go back and say, it's not. It's not a committee responsibility. It's a committee function and an employer responsibility to ensure that it actually happens. Okay. All right. So kind of getting into some of the weeds of the employer, supervisor, and worker responsibilities. So take this opportunity. Anybody want to put some primer things in the chat? What are some responsibilities that belong to the employer? We're going to focus on section 25 specifically. I'm not going to get into 26 too much, but what do we think are some primer responsibilities that our employer has? Sorry, just trying to catch up. Okay, so Vanessa wrote due diligence. Perfect start. Absolutely. Due diligence, that everything reasonable in the circumstance to protect is considered an employer responsibility for sure. Proper training, I see. Policy creation. Good examples. Assigning competent supervisors. That one's fun. I'm going to give that one some attention in a second as well. Great examples. Yeah, great examples of some of those employer responsibilities for sure. So as mentioned, we are only going to focus on section 25 of the employer responsibilities. In the Act, if you do want to do some future reading or maybe some homework from Kristen, employer responsibilities are also outlined in section 26. A lot of those are around kind of chemical management, ensuring that we're not being exposed. But right now, let's focus on some of those responsibilities under section 25. All right, so these are not in the order in which you may see them in the Act, but we're going to go through all these employer things as written under that section 25 of the Act. So employers have to ensure that equipment, materials, and protective devices are provided, maintained in good condition, and used properly. Fairly new to legislation, just about not even a year old yet. We did, or the ministry did add a kind of part 2 of this first responsibility. It is written in the Act as a B.1. Employers also have to ensure that personal protective clothing and equipment that is provided, worn, or used is a proper fit and is appropriate in the circumstance, having regard to all relevant factors, including factors that could be prescribed. So that's new. If you have a policy program, etc., that outlines employer responsibilities, this should be included now. So it's not good enough to just ensure that material, devices, PPE, etc., are provided. It has to be provided in the proper manner and with proper fit in considering different workers we have at the workplace. So again, really new piece of legislation there. They have to ensure that safety measures and procedures are in place. So do we have the right SOPs, programs, policies, procedures? They have to ensure that the building meets building code requirements. It's a place where we've included the building code expectation. You have to provide information, instruction, supervision to workers and ensure supervisors or the authority over workers are aware of hazards. Kind of goes to the IRS, right? Employer has to ensure the supervisor knows what they need to communicate and what they are supervising. Afford assistance and cooperation to the committee. So legal responsibility for the employer to provide assistance to the committee. So it's not okay for the employer to say, like, we don't have time to do that inspection this month. They have to have time. They have to make time for those committee members to do inspections, go to meetings, etc. Provide information in case of a medical emergency. So if your employer has an awareness of a medical situation that could promote or support medical assistance, they do have to provide that information if there's a medical emergency. Example, I'm allergic to bees. My boss knows that. If I'm in the middle of a field and all of a sudden I start to have a reaction, my employer or my boss needs to say, I know Kristen's allergic to bees. She's probably been stung. You probably need to do something to help her with that, right? So that's kind of an example of that. They have to employ only those that are legally eligible to work. It's really more of an age thing, right? Or people to be about the workplace that are of age. This is a place that you would see that word as prescribed, meaning that the age that you have to be is going to be outlined in the regulations. Not the same age for mining as it is for logging, as it is for industrial, right? Those ages are prescribed within the regulations. Somebody already wrote this in the chat. We'll give a little more focus on this one in a second. They have to appoint competent persons as supervisors. So employer responsibility to ensure that a supervisor is considered competent by legislation. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Continues on into 25.2. So the employer has to provide information, instruction, and supervision to ensure, did I already read that one? I apologize, guys. That bullet, I apologize, was copied again. My mistake there. So we'll go on. Acquaint a worker, person authority over a worker on any hazards in the workplace, handling, storage, use, disposal, and transport of any article, device, equipment, or thing. So this is acquainting workers with hazards associated with chemicals, associated with noise, associated with physical agents, things that could potentially cause injury or concern. All right, continuing on still. We've got some posting requirements. So post in a conspicuous place at the workplace or in any readily accessible electronic form, a copy of the act, a copy of explanatory material required by the ministry. Review annually a health and safety policy and ensure that that policy is posted. Provide to the committee or the health and safety rep any reports associated with the health and safety. Make sure that those reports are also available to the workers. And then we've got that reasonable expectation, provide or take every precaution reasonable in the circumstance to protect the worker. So you'll see lots and lots of defined employer responsibilities under that section 25, and again, even more under that section 26. I will now kind of talk about or add in that we have also added a lot of subsections to the employer responsibilities. So we think about, again, the employer, they've got 25 and 26, and then as legislation continues to grow and change, subsections have been added and included as well. So these would be some subsections that have been sort of added to the employer responsibilities that are almost giving additional expectations. So 25.1, added, sorry, about 5, even longer, maybe years ago, about footwear. So employers could no longer require people to wear high heels, right? So that used to be something that maybe you did in a restaurant industry or service industry. Employers can no longer require their workers to wear high heels as part of their job. We know that probably a couple of years ago now, naloxone kits were added, right? So there's employer responsibilities around naloxone, determining if there could be an opioid concern at the workplace that could affect the worker. If they determine that there is a concern with opioid, they now have to provide a naloxone kit and follow the naloxone kit regulation if they have a determination that that's a requirement. Again, really new to legislation. Probably the newest piece of legislation that requires focus is 25.3 around washroom facilities. So if we haven't heard of yet, as of July 1st, 2025, new expectation within the Act for employers to ensure that washrooms are maintained in a clean, sanitary condition. So you have to have washrooms that are well maintained, clean, and sanitary. It's part of the Act now under 25.3. We also have a regulation that is going to be enforced or come into effect January 1st, 2026, that says we have to keep records of that cleaning. And within the regulation, not enforceable until January 2026, it tells you it has to be on the record of cleaning. So the date that the cleaning happened, the time the cleaning happened, posted in the washroom facility in an area that the workers expected to see it, a record of the last 2 cleanings at least. So there's expectations around the record within that washroom expectation. So washroom clean and sanitary in the Act, record keeping in the regulation, record keeping regulation not again coming into force until January 2026. Is everybody aware of this new piece of legislation? Maybe just hands up if you knew that washroom cleaning or washroom facilities was added to an employer responsibility in legislation. All right, I see lots of hands and thumbs. Are we also aware of the regulation that's going to come into play? And you got a couple months to get ready for that. Some hands and thumbs there too, which is great. Yeah, again, pretty new to us. So something that that maybe companies and workplaces need to start getting a little bit ready for. Okay. All right. So let's move on now into supervisor responsibilities. So same kind of primer question. What are some supervisor responsibilities that we need to be aware of? under section 27 specifically? Sorry, I'm reading Elizabeth's question on the bottom. I apologize. But any of the regulations also apply to employee bunkhouse and employee housing? Yeah, so ultimately it would, right? So if your bunkhouse or the employee housing is provided by the employer, as in like you are providing it for the employee. I think often like agriculture, right? If you've got temporary foreign workers coming in or somebody that works within the farming facility, and you're providing them that bunkhouse as part of their employment, then yes, that regulation would apply to them as well. Yeah. Yeah, there's probably some detail in there, Elizabeth, in the sense that like we obviously don't have jurisdiction when it's like off hours, et cetera, but we can maybe do some offline chat if you want to talk about that. But ultimately, the answer is yes, it does have application. Okay, so reading, so proper training for the team. Yes, that's a supervisor responsibility. Detect hazards for sure, part of those responsibilities. Sorry, looking and see if I saw any other supervisor ones come up. Those are two big ones, absolutely important to focus on. Okay, so let's go through them then. So 27.1, 27.2 is where we find our supervisor responsibilities. So ensure that workers work in a manner and with protective devices and measures and procedures required by the Act and regulations. They have to ensure that workers use and wear equipment, protective devices, or clothing that the worker's employer requires to be worn or used. Without limiting section 1, we have to advise workers of the existence of any actual potential dangers to their health and safety of the worker, which the supervisor is aware. We're so prescribed to provide workers with written instructions as to the measures and procedures that have to be taken for the protection of the worker. We also have another one, that due diligence clause, take every precaution reasonable in the circumstance to protect the worker. So you'll see under section 27, they're a lot more focused on the ensure, right? Ensure we're following procedures, ensure we're wearing the right PPE, ensure we provide training, ensure we provide, the right work instructions. And then again, similar to the employer, we've got that due diligence clause for the supervisor as well. Okay. All right, so this is a question that I said would come up in just a second, and here it is. So we have an employer responsibility that directly impacts a supervisor expectation. So under the employer responsibility, we said that employers had to ensure that they had competent supervisors, right? So ensure that our supervisors were considered or deemed competent. Also mentioned that the competency that we're talking about is directly related to supervisors, right? And the legislative definition of competency associated with supervisors. So there are 3 things legislatively that make a supervisor competent. Anybody want to take a stab at least 1 or 2 of them in the chat box? What are sort of the 3 things that make a supervisor competent? All right, so we've got 2, great. So we've got some familiarity with the Act and regulations. Yeah, so we know the law. Experienced and trained, so you know the job, right? So knowledge of the job based on our training experience, etc. What's the last one? I think, Vicki, you tried to maybe start something, it didn't maybe finish there. All right, Robin got our 3rd, amazing. So familiar with the hazards. So we think about, again, competency. Competency is based on that definition in the legislation, and it really is these 3 different things. So defined within legislation, competent means qualified because of knowledge, training, and experience to organize work and its performance. Familiar with the Act and regulations that apply to the work. So we know the job, we know the law, and knowledge of any potential or actual dangers to health and safety in the workplace. So the job, the hazards, and the law are really the 3 things that a supervisor needs to know to be deemed or considered competent. All right, so maybe an opinion style question here. But when do you think is classically the weakest point for our supervisor definition? So when we think about, again, determining if a supervisor is competent and needing to meet these 3 expectations, what's maybe the one that are a little bit weak on typically when it comes to supervisor competency? Yeah, B. I would agree entirely. It is the legislation, right? So I don't want to say always by any means, but when I go into workplaces, often I think about competency, and it is this B, this familiarity with the act and legislation, that is as often where our supervisors are maybe a little bit weaker. Remind me again, whose responsibility is it to ensure that supervisors meet this definition? The employers. Yeah. So it's not a supervisor's responsibility to ensure they know the legislation. It is employer's responsibility to ensure that they've given the supervisor this information that's required to make them competent. Okay. So final group before we move into some due diligence stuff. Worker. So worker is section 28 of the Act. That's where their responsibilities lie. What are the worker responsibilities that you guys can think of before I share them with you? Report hazards. Good start, Mike. Not engage in horseplay. Perfect. Thanks, Robin. Report hazards. Yeah, same. Wear PPE. Reporting. Lots of great reporting ones there. Yeah, a lot of the do stuff, right? Sean, I like that you put that in there. So refuse to work if it's not safe. That is their right. A worker has the right to refuse work if it's not safe. Every worker in Ontario that follows the Act and regulations has that right. It is not their responsibility. They're not responsible for refusing. So you won't find it as a responsibility, but 100% it is their right. So I love that you brought it up, because it is important to always remember our 3 basic health and safety rights. Again, it just isn't a responsibility. They don't have to do it. It's their right to do it if they feel like they're being asked to do unsafe work. Okay. Okay, so lots of great answers in that chat. In a worker world, we almost write our responsibilities as things that they have to do and what they're not allowed to do. So it's a bit of a do and do not from a worker's side. So must work in a healthy and safe manner, following policies, procedures, and the law. Must use and wear personal protective equipment or clothing required. Must report to their employer or their supervisor if something is missing that could endanger themselves or another worker. Must report to their employer or supervisor if there's a contravention to the Act or regulations. Must nots. So you've got some shall nots. We shall not remove or make ineffective any protective device required by the regulation or by the employer. Shall not operate any equipment, machines, devices in a way that could endanger themselves or another worker. Shall not put themselves or other workers at risk by working unsafely, that boisterous behavior, etc., etc. So the workers' responsibilities are all under that do section, right? These are things we have to do and that we're not allowed to do. So you can see the responsibility is written as like that: ensure, develop, enforce, and then follow. Always remember, supervisors are without question workers too. So if you are a supervisor in this room, also have that expectation to follow the worker responsibilities. Okay, was there a right or a responsibility, I apologize, under the worker section that was missing that stood out to you? Does anybody notice a responsibility that is not outlined for the worker that maybe was outlined for the other 2 groups? Waiting to see if something pops up. Due diligence. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for getting that in there. So that isn't a worker responsibility. The worker is not responsible for doing everything reasonable in the circumstance to protect. That is an employer responsibility and a supervisor responsibility. The worker is responsible for doing what you told them to. That's the worker responsibility. Report injuries isn't in there. Report hazards is in there. Report infractions is in there for sure. Oh, sorry, maybe as a missing is what you're putting in there. But yeah, there are other ones for sure that are not under the worker that do belong to. But that highlight one is really the due diligence. So I hear workplaces often say like, well, the worker should have known not to do that. Well, no, the law says they don't need to know that. The law says they need to follow what you told them to do. So unless you didn't tell them not to do that in training, policies, programs, or procedures, we can't hold them accountable to what they ought to have done, right? That due diligence doesn't belong to the worker. It belongs to the supervisor and the employer. Okay. Okay, so very nice segue into the last couple of slides that we've got here, then the next section, which is about due diligence. So we are going to talk a little bit at the end about what it is, what it means. So let's do some primer things. What does due diligence mean to you? And what are some examples of how you guys promote or show or prove due diligence? Yeah, I'm just going to give a couple of minutes for us to get some stuff in the chat box. All right, Robin, I love that you were willing to kind of put that one in first. People don't want to talk about it, but it's definitely a real one. Progressive discipline is a way to be able to prove due diligence without question. Training, retraining, for sure. Absolutely. Verification, yeah. So training in documented form. Yes, absolutely. Documented discussions, meeting minutes, written. I love that you guys are adding these documented or written things because that's a huge piece of it, right? Okay, some great answers coming in. So ultimately, what is due diligence? It is that responsibility, taking every precaution reasonable in the circumstance to protect the worker. That is what due diligence is. Did you do everything reasonable to protect your worker? How do we demonstrate due diligence? By all those things you guys wrote in the chat box. Some other examples here. Policies, programs, logs, documents, communication, training, corrective actions, corrective counseling, progressive discipline, whatever you would like to kind of talk about. Following up, monitoring, right? All those things can help support due diligence as long as you can prove it. So all of these things, making sure they're documented. So you did a safety talk, great. What'd you talk about? Write it down, document it. Who was there? You did training, awesome. What was your training on? Did you document it? Did you write it down? Could you prove that it happened? I always think a good check for due diligence in the world of safety, if it isn't written down, it didn't count, right? Ministry is not going to believe you. You have to prove it to them. So kind of think in the back of your mind, I know I did the thing. If I was ever asked to prove it to somebody, could I do that? Because again, in the world of safety, if you didn't write it down, it doesn't count. It doesn't exist, right? If you can't prove it happened. Okay, so just another way to kind of think about due diligence, a little bit of a gut check for you. So often we think about due diligence and everything reasonable under these kind of moral considerations as well as legal ones. So again, just a bit of a gut check. Would you be comfortable doing the task or activity yourself with the current controls in place? If this was your best friend, spouse, child, sibling, would you be comfortable assigning this task to them? If you weren't, maybe you haven't done, everything reasonable to protect. Is the situation going to keep me up at night, right? Am I going to think about this later? Am I going to think about the things that I ought to or could have or should have done? Legally, definitely, we've got to think about all those legalities. So was it foreseeable? Did I have the right controls in place? Did I follow the act and regulations, right? That's always going to be a test of due diligence. Was the control foreseeable or practical? Did I follow those extra guidelines and standards that they really give me those good or best industry standards or practices? Did I follow other common industry practices? Again, would somebody perceive this as me doing everything I reasonably could? So kind of gut check when it comes to due diligence. Make sure everything that we're doing is not only factual, but it's documented, right? So due diligence is based on fact and based on documentation. So this is not about your feelings. It's not about what you believe, what you think, what you feel. It's what happened. What did you see? What did you observe, right? So it's based on facts. It's specific. It includes details about either the training or the instruction or the communication or the discipline or the corrective counseling, whatever it is. And it's based on your observations and not your opinions. We do need to ensure that it's always documented. So documents what you said, what you did, when it happened, who was there. And I will kind of refocus the fact that documents need to be detailed enough that you could explain what happened. So if you're doing a safety talk on slip, trips, and falls as an example, don't just write down safety talk on slip, trips, and falls. What did you talk about? What are the slips, trips, and falls at your facility? What did you focus on? Did you focus on cords on the floor? Did you focus on cleaning up spills, right? When we think about documentation, the details matter, right? You need to be able to show later the specifics around what was discussed, not sort of just that general bucket of what was reviewed. So, interesting question. I always get a lot of feedback on this one. What do we think? And you can use this as a poll or a hands up kind of thing. If I comply with all parts of the Act and regulations, will I meet the test of due diligence? So let's do hands up if you think yes. If you complied with every part of the Act and regulations, you would meet the test of due diligence. I don't see any hands. Vanessa. Okay, Vanessa put a hand up. Maybe you jumped the gun. Anybody else want to join Vanessa? I see a couple of thumbs coming up too. All right, so let's do the flip. Who thinks no? Who thinks if you comply with all parts of the Act and regulations, you will not meet the test of due diligence necessarily? Okay, more hands, more thumbs. Yeah, the answer is maybe not, right? Truly, maybe not. It's kind of a fun way or interesting way to say it, but the legislation, the Act and regulations is literally the least you can do. So we think about that. It's kind of a weird way to talk about legislation, but it is the least you can do. It doesn't mean you've done everything, right? So the Act and regulations does not necessarily mean you'll meet the test of due diligence, because the Act and regulations doesn't cover all hazards, right? It may not be meeting that expectation of did you do everything reasonable? Easy examples, and then I'll kind of move on. MSDs and ergonomics. We don't have legislation to support what we need to do to protect. Heat stress. We don't have heat stress legislation. Does it mean that heat's not a hazard? Of course not, right? Do we need to protect workers from heat? Absolutely we do. We don't have any legislation to help us with that though, right? So that's when we have to go to guidelines and standards and industry practices and all those other things to help support that due diligence expectation. All right, not to end on a bad note, but we always want to make sure that everybody is aware of fines, penalties, and convictions that could happen if things go terribly wrong at our workplace. So this is another thing that is ever changing in legislation. Continues to truthfully get worse and worse, but this is as bad as it can get. So fines and penalties if a workplace or an individual is convicted of a health and safety infraction that caused injury, fatality, etc. Okay. So for individuals, if you are a director or an officer of a company, you could be fined up to $1.5 million. Up to $500,000 for other individuals. Classically, the other individuals are supervisors, right? That's supervisor level. So up to $500,000 per offense. Also, or included in that, up to 12 months in jail. So it's not an either or. You could get fined up to $500,000 and up to 12 months in jail. Okay. Robin, great question. So deemed an employer, yeah, maybe a CEO, maybe an owner, right? Like somebody that's at that senior level that sort of acts and represents the CEO or the director of the company. Yeah. So included in all these fines, you also have that 25% victim fine surcharge. So it's not actually $500,000 if you were ever charged with the max. It's closer to $625 because you've got that 25% victim fine surcharge on top. Corporations, this is where we continue to see numbers change as well. There is a new line in here. I'll highlight just in case someone's missed it. So corporations can be fined up to $2 million per offense or per charge. Again, most of the time companies are not charged with just one offense, so it's up to $2 million per. new to legislation. So within the last, again, don't quote me on times, I apologize, guys, but no more than 6 months, maybe about 6 months ago. First time we've seen in legislation, then we've actually, or the ministry, apologize, has actually written in a mandatory minimum. So we've always written fines and orders as a maximum. It's first time we've seen a minimum. So now there's a mandatory minimum fine of $500,000 if you've had a repeat offense within a 2-year period. So if you had somebody get hurt, knock on wood, it's not going to happen to any of us, but somebody gets hurt tomorrow because of a lockout infraction, you're going to go through that scenario, maybe get some fines or orders, etc. If 6 months from now somebody gets hurt because of a lockout infraction, mandatory minimum $500,000, okay, to the corporation, so to the company. So that's again new to legislation. We don't see minimums, or you've never seen minimums before. So just keep that in mind, right? You're not walking away with less than $500,000 if it's a second offense within a 2-year time frame. Sorry, just catching up on some questions. The supervisor fine, can employer pay for it? So the easy answer is no. The easy answer is no. The company cannot pay an individual person's fine. I know that there's some legalities and contracts that I don't know all the details around as far as like specifics around companies, but the easy answer is no. The individual that receives the fine is required to pay the fine. Yeah, that's how that works. All right. And then just super brief reminder that health and safety legislation is not exempt from criminal expectations as well. So if there was a safety incident at a workplace, and there was, some thoughts that there was some criminal intent behind it. So we've heard probably that wanton and reckless disregard to human health or human safety. It could also go into the criminal code, where criminal charges could come into play too. Again, won't focus on this, but do remember that safety does not just belong to safety legislation. It does have the ability to flow into other pieces of legislation as well. So not to end on a totally bad note, as much as, fines and convictions are the last couple of slides, I will put out a little bit of a challenge to you guys as well. Bit of a reflection. And again, if you're willing to put it in the chat, you're welcome to. But what is going to be your commitment to due diligence, whether it's as an individual or as somebody that represents an employer? What can we do, right? What can we do every day to make sure we're doing everything we can to protect our workers? Goes right back to our first slide, kind of our quick full circle moment. There's no job out there that's worth doing unsafely, right? We come to work to enjoy outside of work, right? We come to work to support our lives outside of it. And nothing we do in our work is worth, not doing it safely, not getting to go home to do the things that we enjoy. So again, more of a reflection. If you want to put it in the chat, you're welcome. Or any additional questions, I'm looking at the time, we're about 4 minutes out now. Great opportunity for anybody to ask additional questions or comments, or share anything with the group that they're interested in sharing. So I'll leave it now to those questions, and we'll remind that WSPS is always here to help at all times. I think at the end of this, you guys will all get my email address and some contact information if you've got different questions. Feel free to reach out to me anytime, or anybody else within our WSPS team. I know you're also going to get an email. I think it comes from me, maybe it comes from Safety Connection. Look for either about some of the resources. And again, this presentation also will be available in the future as a video, etc., etc. So I'll stop talking and read some of these comments for a second to make sure I didn't miss any questions. I love that, Vanessa. I love that. Yeah, these sessions are a great way to commit to due diligence, right? Keeping up to date, making sure that you continue to learn. That's an amazing way, right? You want to be able to provide this information back to our teams. Keeping relevant is a huge portion of due diligence for sure. Oh, right. Well, on that note, timing went well today. I have 1 minute to spare. So that's exciting. I hope everybody has a great afternoon. I hope everyone gets to take a break at lunch. It's cooler today, but in my area at least still absolutely beautiful, as you can see with my fighting the sun glare for this entire session. So hopefully you get some fresh air and enjoy the last beautiful days that we have of the year. Thanks everybody for attending as well. Sean, if you're still on, I will kind of answer that. That's a great question, right? So it's up to the employer, right? Up to the employer to make sure that the workers understand their rights. It's a huge part of why we do that health and safety in 4 steps training, which is mandated, right, by the ministry for our workers to do. It very much outlines the rights, but it is an employer expectation to ensure workers understand their basic health and safety rights. And that's big, right? Like workers get those rights, and we have to make sure that they're communicated, and make sure that the worker understands that if they believe it's unsafe, that they have that right to refuse. That's a challenge because you are counting on the employer to provide that information, but that very much is an employer expectation. Yeah, for sure.